as you have people moving westward, you have both free soilers. So there's a party called the Free Soilers, and they are people who believe it should be a free state. But you also have Democrats who are pro-slavery coming in, and they clash massively. And famously, for years and years, there was this extraordinary violence that broke out in Kansas between the two factions. And that's when we have John Brown coming on the scene, who is this sort of evangelical. He's sort of mad. He has this kind of divine sort of wrath about him. He thinks he's kind of God's agent on earth, and he's been put there to destroy the institution of slavery. And he and his sons hack to death 5 pro-slavery men in Kansas as part of this kind of maniacal sort of messianic drive to wipe out slavery and anybody who thinks that it should go ahead. But I'll pause there and I'll let you. Are there any questions you have there before I kind of charge on?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much of a question. I think it's more like, I mean, in terms of obviously when the states were being kind of added, you mentioned they did have this kind of system in place to kind of try and keep it balanced mostly. So you would always add kind of, for every one free state, you'd get a slave state as well. Yeah. But obviously going into, I mean, if we look at the US today, obviously states have their own government, they have their own kind of Senate and stuff. Like obviously there's the federal government that decides, like the really big stuff. But I think it's interesting that it kind of obviously devolves into this system of local governments that kind of just decide what they want to be. But yeah. I guess when you're looking at, say, like, you've come off the back of the Mexican conflict and, vast amounts of this land have been gained in the South. Like, who's populating that? I guess then you don't have there's no system for them to control who's going into which state, and then obviously who then becomes the majority of the decision-making bodies, because you're thinking about geographical proximity. Like if people are living in slave states in the South and they're pro-slavery, and then they go and create a new state that's like right next door, they're probably not going to be wanting, like, abolitionists like living next to them. They're going to be like, no, it's our land.
And crucially, they're taking their property, i.e. human beings, with them. And there is this period, even in free states that are admitted, where, I can't remember the word, there's a specific word for it, but basically, a sojourn, it's called a sojourn. So a slave owner who moves into what's to become a free state, whilst it's still in the process of becoming that state, and things are still being decided, all of these grants, these sort of sojourn grants, are given out to slaveholders to basically say, well, you can go, while we're still working all of this kind of stuff out, you can still go ahead. So basically it's a free pass to them to continue practicing slavery, even in a quote unquote free state, because, how are you going to enforce any of this kind of stuff until you have, like, sort of militias and courts and all this kind of stuff. It's all very frontier, like Bleeding Kansas. It's total frontier justice. It's people just taking the question into their own hands. There's no law and order. It's just absolute anarchy.
Well, that's the other thing to think about as well when you're looking at this whole scenario, because we've already mentioned the US was still forming at that point in time, and
it's very much still the Wild West.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, we see some films about it, and we think, oh yeah, that was just like, this random period in time. But it's like, no, this was happening at a very formative period of the US
completely
in their history.
Yeah, completely. And that takes me to California, which is an important one too, because the gold rush of '48 in California is a real catalyst for all of this, because there'd been questions over, is it going to be a free state? Is it not going to be a free state? But of course, when you suddenly have people flooding there to mine for gold, the first thing people think is, great, we'll use slave labor to mine the gold. That's going to be what we do. So of course, this question immediately crops up. and is pushed to the forefront. So there is a thing called the Compromise of 1850. A lot of compromises here. We've got the Missouri Compromise as well as the Compromise of 1850, which is a package of 5 bills that included the admission of California as a free state. So they decided that California would be a free state. But as a way of balancing it out, both, I believe it's, I might have to fact check myself on this in a minute, but Utah and New Mexico are both admitted as slave states. Right. And on top of that as well, there is a thing called the Fugitive Slave Act, which is a very, very controversial bill, but it basically means that runaway slaves can be recaptured by their owners. And northern citizens, even more crucially than that, northern citizens, because obviously slaves fleeing on the Underground Railroad, which of course is not literally, some people sometimes think it is, but it's not a literal Underground Railroad. It's in the dead of night, people being kind of spirited away between different houses of people, sort of safe houses, to get them slowly kind of pinballing their way up north to freedom. Yeah. But say they got all the way to Boston, which was a real sort of heart of abolitionism, a great place to be if you're a runaway slave. Your owner could come after you, and the northern citizens of Boston would be compelled legally to assist you in recapturing your property. Of course, it is massively beneficial to the slave owners in the sense that because slaves don't have any kind of documentation, they don't have any papers, it's basically just a license to kidnap. So there were endless, and the whole story of 12 Years a Slave, which is obviously a fabulous movie, but based on the memoir by Solomon Northup. He was a free man who had never been a slave in the North and was kidnapped under the Fugitive Slave Act and taken down to the South and claimed. It was simply claimed by the planter that he was a runaway, and of course he had no way of proving otherwise, because who's going to listen to him?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a massively educated man and very literate, but you've got to think most slaves were not. I mean, how on earth would they be able to convince anybody, not being able to read or write or any of the rest of it, and certainly not having any kind of documentation? So it's a very, very controversial act, because it angers Northerners, because they feel like, hang on a minute, we here do not practice this abomination. Why should we be asked to assist those who do? And in Boston in particular, there's some great stories of local sort of clergymen and all sorts arming themselves and protecting, quite fiercely protecting runaway slaves who they were sheltering in their homes. Very, very moving. Lots of brilliant stories there of helping them to get to then on to Canada or to Britain or elsewhere.